Now, of course, everything's supposed to be, beer, skittles, roses after a change of government. Well, guess what? Reality, just as we said before the election, is hitting hard, particularly on the cost of living. Interesting survey came out today suggesting that a huge number of Australians are feeling more stressed, more exhausted than they were before the election. Put simply, 60% of Australians are now feeling anxious, stressed or exhausted following the May 21 election as rising interest rates, energy and petrol prices heap pressure on businesses and households. It's almost like we knew. Now, this survey, which has come out today, shows in blue what people were thinking in April versus in red what they are now thinking in May. So, as you can see here, there is a huge change in the number of people who, on the far left, are worried about the cost of living, which has gone from about 30% to now 50%. Housing affordability has gone from 15% to 25%. Climate change has gone from just under 20 to almost 25. Healthcare, those concerns have fallen away after a change in government. The economy in general, apparently, well, people's concerns in April have been replaced by apparently greater confidence now, despite the fact that they have surged when it comes to the cost of living. Petrol prices up, COVID concerns down, wages up, and unemployment down. Now, as you know, how many times did we show you about the current government blaming the former one for what is a cyclical matter? Peter Malinauskas, the Labor leader, when he was the opposition leader in South Australia, said governments can't do anything about prices, so don't expect me to do anything. But Labor made it very clear, if not subtly, at times directly, that they would fix this problem.
We've inherited high and rising inflation and rising interest rates. We've inherited falling real wages, and we've inherited $1 trillion in debt.
But we have $1 trillion of debt that we've inherited from the former government.
The government, on its first full day in office, is dealing with the situation we inherited.
Serious challenges in the budget and in the economy that we've inherited from our predecessors.
My government has a policy of doing what we can to assist cost of living pressures. At the same time, we're conscious of the fact that we've been left with $1 trillion of debt.
Sorry, is that why we call him each way elbow? We've got a policy to deal with it, but we also know we don't really have much room to move here because things are cyclical. They made everything personal in the past 3 years, so that's the standard that I will hold them to each and every night here at 8 o'clock. Now, cost of living, inflation pushing up interest rates. We've talked about this cycle ad infinitum. Well, guess what the Treasurer said today? Get ready for inflation to go even higher.
There's no use mincing words when it comes to this inflation challenge, which will get worse before it gets better.
This inflation challenge will get harder before it gets easier, and which will get worse before it gets better, to get worse before it gets better.
So help me out. Let's say Australia was a house and Australia had some leaky pipes and we didn't like the previous plumber because they weren't fixing the problem. So we hired a new plumber who has now walked in, looked at the problem and gone, that's going to get worse before it gets better. Okay, so yeah, cool. What's your plan to fix it? Oh, it's just going to get worse before it gets better. Thanks, Scoop. In part, you were able to ride to government on an expectation of being able to do something. Can they do it in 3 weeks? Of course not. But can we actually start to hear in the many, many speeches some questions from people who I understand do not want to rock the boat? They don't want to break the new media rules, which is to not ask a question that's too loud, but to start saying, okay, great. Thanks for defining the problem. What's the solution? What's your solution? Because as that survey showed, cost of living, which apparently was the number one driving issue at the election, has surged since the election. Meantime, get ready for food supply to become an issue. Certainly the stuff that we're importing from the rest of the world, that's going to be a problem too. We'll talk about that with Adam Crichton a little bit later in the program. And get ready as well for your winter energy bills to go through the roof. This is the cost of transition. Of course, we weren't here yesterday because of the great documentary from Hedley Thomas. How good was that to see? You can see it all now on demand, or you can find it on skynews.com.au. But as you know, interest rates, they went up yesterday by 0.5%. The single biggest rise in interest rates in 22 years. Geez, I wonder if there was a fat bloke with a beard on television saying that, guess what the consequences would be of a change of government that plans to spend every dollar the previous one did, plus tens of billions of dollars more, with no actual capacity to deal with inflation. Guess what happens? Up, 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 up. Now, this, of course, is a shock and awe tactic, apparently, from the RBA. Well, consider Australians both shocked and awed. But the reality here is that the Labor Party was willing to blame the previous government when interest rates went up last month.
This is the triple whammy that Scott Morrison has presided over.
Under Scott Morrison, cost of living is in crisis.
This cannot be the thanks that Australians get.
Scott Morrison has an excuse for everything and a plan for nothing.
Scott Morrison's economic credibility is in tatters.
So what happens when the largest single interest rate rise happens in 22 years? Well, of course, Anthony Albanese was asked questions about it while he was in Indonesia, but says, oh, no, don't ask me those questions now.
I make it a policy. I said this on my first visit. I intend to stick to it, that I won't be commenting on domestic issues while overseas.
Okay. So literally the biggest interest rate rise in 22 years, with cost of living getting worse since the election and planned to get even further worse, to not use the English language properly, in the next few months. Now, while Albo was riding around on his bamboo push bike with the Indonesian president, the reality in Australia that people wanted to hear from their Prime Minister, who apparently understood their pain, who understood what it means about cost of living and interest rate rises when it was Scott Morrison's fault less than a month ago. Well, this is the reality here in Australia right now. Average Aussie mortgage brokers, or mortgage borrowers, are facing more than $500 increases by Christmas. There's also a suggestion that mortgages will break the bank for as many as, how's this, 500,000 people in Victoria alone. But before you're somebody who thinks that it's time to ring the bank and talk about financial hardship, something that all of the banks are saying, if you call us now, we'll be able to help out with, just be warned, because we learned today that if you do a deal regarding financial hardship, it will end up on your permanent credit record.